about Jewish thought. Hey everyone, this is Yosef Siegel, and welcome to the premiere episode of Back of the Beis, the podcast which I host together with Yehuda Rabin, where we answer all the questions you've always had about Jewish thought, ideas, and practices in a more loose, relaxed, but still informative, long conversation. This week's episode is part one of a discussion that Yehuda and I had on the Oral Torah, answering the basic question of how do we know that something which was developed by man is valid? How true is it? And Yehuda and I sat down and talked about this for a while, and for that reason, we're splitting it into two parts. This week's episode, you can check out the exact details in the show notes, but basically we answer questions of the structure of the Oral Torah, exactly the process of how the Oral Torah was given and developed, what does it mean that it's oral, the different parts of the Oral Torah, and we finish off to some proofs of how the Oral Torah existed and how it can be transmitted accurately. Sounds like a lot. It was a lot, but there's even more coming next week in part two. But in the meantime, here is part one, Back of the Beis, the Oral Torah. Finally got a name.
We do have a name now.
Back of the Beis.
Back of the Beis. Where all the conversations you wish you could have had.
It all goes down in the back of the Beis.
Every good kid gets kicked out because he spends too much time in the back of the Beis. That's the bottom line. I know a guy, not going to mention his name.
Well, I don't know why you need to make it all bad. There's good stuff that happens in the back of the Beis.
Great things.
That's what I'm saying. Like, my vibe is that either the best learning or the best philosophy questions go on in the back of the Beis.
Always the best philosophy questions go down the back of the Beis.
So that's the idea. Like, everything goes down in the back of the Beis.
The coolest rabbis sit in the back of the Beis, too.
That's true. And sometimes you think the front is the front and really it's the back. Did you ever think of that?
No.
Okay.
But, I guess it would depend on where the door is, practically speaking.
Why does the door always have to be in the front?
Why is a spoon called the spoon?
The door doesn't have to be in the front. Why does the door have to be in the front? We're literally in the back of the Beis right now.
No, we're on the right side of the Beis.
Okay, but the door is in the back.
It's in the back of the Beis, yeah. True. Alright, point taken.
There we go.
Alright, for this week, though.
Yeah, on back of the Beis.
On back of the Beis. I wanted to take the direction of...
So, well, the overall topic this week is going to be Torah Sheba'al Peh.
The oral.
The Oral Torah.
Because a lot of people don't take into account that Moshe was given really two Torahs on Har Sinai. How many Torahs were given to Moshe?
Right, so it's very clear in Jewish tradition that the Torah Sheba'al Peh was given, the Oral Torah was given at the same time as the Torah Shebiksav. And the reason why it doesn't mention that in the Torah specifically is because the Torah doesn't say that the Torah was given. You know, like it says like these are all the things that I gave you at Har Sinai, but it never goes through all 613 mitzvahs that we find in the Torah.
Right.
You know, they're going through over the normal Seder. Obviously when the Torah is given, the only thing we see straight up is the Aseres Dibros. There are other times where we see other mitzvahs that are mentioned as being given at Har Sinai, but there's no like total collection of all 613 mitzvahs at Har Sinai. So, but the idea is that when Moshe went up to Har, and also at the giving of the Torah, that's true. Like it's not God and Moshe didn't stand there and give all 613 at the time. They gave 10, and that was the actual Matan Torah that we spoke about in our other recording, which you'll hear either before or after this one. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the Torah being given, the entire Torah was given during the 40 days that Moshe was on Har Sinai, up in the sky.
Right, it was given to Moshe, not...
Right, and then Moshe gave it over to everyone else. So
really,
Chazal teaches that it was all given at the same time.
I've read in places that it was given compartmentally throughout the 40 years that they were in the desert.
To Moshe or to the nation?
No, to Moshe. Meaning all was given to him. All the knowledge was given to him in one shot in those 40 days. But in terms of knowing what exactly to write down, was given to him compartmentally. That's why there are paragraphs in...
Oh, okay. So you're talking about the fact that the way that it's written, the 613 are written in the Torah, the actual written version of it was only given over as time went on.
Right, meaning Hashem would whenever he felt necessary, he would come to Moshe through the Kruvim and through the tabernacle. Is that what it's called?
Sure. The Mishkan.
The Mishkan. And he would say, okay, now we're doing this and this, write this down. Yeah. Meaning now we're doing this Seder, we're doing this in this paragraph now, and he would go paragraph by paragraph.
Right. So years. did the Jews know about that mitzvah beforehand? Meaning Moshe knew that mitzvah beforehand,
right?
And he just hadn't written it down in the Torah. So did the Jews know that beforehand?
I don't know.
I don't have any proof of this other than, I mean, Chazal teach us that the whole thing was given to Moshe at Har Sinai, and then he gave it over. Could it be, you think that it took them 40 years to give over the whole Torah? No, I don't think so. It's not like they were running around for 40 years. They spent a lot of time in each one of their locations. Right. So now that would come up with an interesting question. Let's say that really Moshe, this is for sure, Moshe got all the Torah at Har Sinai. Written Torah, the Oral Torah, right. Everything. So then he gives it over the next, let's say it took them 2 years. I'm just picking a random number, right? Let's say it took them 2 years to learn everything. That they got through all 613.
For each person to learn everything.
Right. They got through all 613. I think it took less than that. But let's say it took 2 years, right? When God comes back to Moshe 35 years later and says, okay, now we're going to write this mitzvah in the Torah, and then Moshe gives that over to the people, what are they gaining at that time?
Could be that they were gaining the knowledge as to where to pull it out of the written.
Yeah, that makes sense. That could be, because even if they knew everything beforehand,
they didn't know necessarily where to pull it out of the written Torah.
Right, and as
they may not even have had the entire written Torah. Could be that they were only really given the oral Torah. Moshe knew the written Torah as well.
I think that's interesting. Did they have like psukim? Did they have like random psukim that
I don't know. I don't think
over
so.
mitzvos?
I think that the Torah Shebiksav was not put into its final form until all the way at the end when Moshe on his last day wrote down the final original copy, and he put it inside the tabernacle.
And so where does that, and what does that tell you?
That they didn't necessarily.
It tells you that the oral Torah is really where they learned the mitzvahs from.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and we'll get into this when we start talking about the structure of the oral Torah, that the oral Torah is the more important side
in some sense
of the Torah.
Vastly more important.
In terms of Torah knowledge, the oral Torah is where we know Torah from.
And in terms of it being, like, I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but in terms of it being a living Torah, meaning living through the ages, that's the part which is really breathing is the oral Torah.
Right, because we continue to modify it even nowadays.
Right. Not according to our own will and...
No, but, I mean, we base it off of the rules, which, again, we'll get into, but, I mean, the example that I always use when talking about this is electricity.
Right.
That it's something which was discussed, I think now it's around 100 years ago, is the first time that it was discussed. And
by who, do you know?
The main discussion in electricity of whether or not you could use it on Shabbos and Yom Tov and stuff like that is between Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who died in the late 80s, early 90s. Late 80s, early 90s. I don't remember exactly. He was born... I guess like the early 20th century. Like right at the turn of the century, I would imagine.
The Chafetz Chaim didn't talk about electricity?
No, it does not. He died pretty early. I mean, he died in the 20s.
Yeah, but electricity's been around since the 18...
Yeah, but not in Poland.
Yeah?
I don't think so.
They didn't have simple lighting electricity in
Poland? He never discusses it.
When was it like first harnessed?
I don't know.
Early 1900s, maybe?
I think so, yeah. It's not that long ago. It's really not... There's an amazing amount of progress in the 20th century.
Cars were electric cars? First ever cars were electric.
Cool.
And the reason that coal and fuel were used instead of electricity was because of battery power. Because of like...
The battery wasn't strong enough.
Yeah, not nearly strong enough.
Interesting. Wow.
Until very recently.
Right. So in theory, the whole battery thing works.
The Tesla.
Another future sponsor.
Another future sponsor, right.
So what were we saying? Yeah, so it's between Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and the Chazon Ish, who Avram Karelitz, who died in the 50s or 60s. He lived in Israel. So those are the two, right? And what did they do? They use, and again, we'll have to go through this whole process because this is really cool how it works. But
super cool.
But they used principles that had been found in the Oral Torah for thousands of years to discuss electricity. So meaning that you go from the very beginning of the Oral Torah, because they were discussing whether or not you could use it on Shabbos. So they were using principles of whether or not malacha on Shabbos is allowed, which is one of the earliest discussions in the Oral Torah,
right?
Because all of the laws of Shabbos of what you are not allowed to do are derived from the construction of the tabernacle, the Mishkan. So that's one of the first things they did after they received the Torah.
Was discuss
was construct the Mishkan.
Rules and laws of Shabbos.
Was construct the Mishkan.
Right. Well, right.
So meaning that those principles, which are then placed onto Shabbos, which 3,000 years later are placed onto electricity,
still being further extrapolated with the same basic rules.
Yeah, and system.
And system.
So that's a great point about it being a living. That when we talk about living Torah, it's the Oral Torah. The written Torah is living in the sense that we're alive, and we're meaning that the Jewish people are alive, and we continue to connect ourselves back to the written Torah. So meaning it remains alive because there are still people that follow it, but as a document, it's complete. Right. There's nothing. You can't make any additions or edits or anything to it.
Anything. Can't even miss a letter.
Right. Has to be written the same way. It can't be written it can't be printed, like on a book, I mean, we obviously have those, but those aren't official Sifrei Torah.
Right.
It needs to still be written on parchment with ink and quill.
Right.
The Oral Torah is
as ancient as it gets.
I'm saying, it's from the beginning, it's printed, it's written and printed from whatever system you want, But the written Torah, in terms of its full holiness, has to be still on parchment. That's a dead medium. No one uses parchment anymore,
right?
Except for the Jews. And
I'm sure places in Africa.
No, it's hard to make parchment.
It is hard.
It's difficult.
I've never done it before, but they say it smells really bad.
It's where
a dead animal.
It says it in the Oral Torah.
It does, right?
Yeah, it talks about it all the time.
In the Talmud.
Yeah. Okay, so getting back to it.
It is one of the ways I like to think about it is like the written Torah being like the complete like sort of language of code that a coder can work with.
Mm-hmm.
But if you know the rules of that language of code, you can extrapolate many ways to input the information to get out.
So should we explain the structure first, and then it'll be more understood what we mean by code in the written Torah and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
I'm not talking about Bible codes.
No, not
what's your take on those Bible code things?
A
lot of them are from Christian
They've
groups,
been proven wrong.
They have been proven wrong.
They've been proven wrong.
Some of them are nuts.
They've been proven wrong. That's my take. But yeah, so basically, okay, so how does the Oral Torah work? So what we explained so far is that the Oral Torah was given at the same time as the written Torah. So the way that it's structured is that we have the written Torah. The written Torah has 613 commandments in them. Then we have the first development from that.
But even that you can't easily pull out 613 commandments just by reading the Bible.
Well, you can't figure out which ones are commandments and which ones are details and which ones are. That's why we have different lists of how many mitzvahs there really are. Everyone has 613, but people have slightly different lists. Right.
Now, what I'm saying, even to get to 613 also comes through the oral tradition, the Oral Torah.
But they're all written there. Meaning, like, to bring another example, like we have, going back to Shabbos, we have 39 malachos of Shabbos, 39 main things which you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. They're not written in the Torah, but it does say in the Torah that you can't work on Shabbos.
Right.
So that's a commandment. So meaning, like, the full details of every single what the commandment entails is not written in the Torah.
Right.
But all 613 are very close. Like they're all written. It's not like they're not written.
Really, because I thought some of them were were like. There are places in the Talmud where it will say, it'll take a pasuk and pull out a mitzvah from it that you wouldn't necessarily, and not a mitzvah from the sages, a mitzvah from the Torah that you couldn't have necessarily read into it.
Like what?
Can't think of anything offhand.
What you think of something? I think they're all. I mean, I think they're all details. I don't know if there's a real mitzvah that not one of the 7 mitzvahs of the Rabbana, not one of the mitzvahs of the sages or anything like that. Something which is straight up a Torah, one of the 613. That's
I think
not
so.
in the Torah at all.
No, not that it's not there. It's just that if you read the same pasuk and you didn't have a tradition as to what was encoded in it,
Okay, fine.
You wouldn't know that there's a commandment there.
Okay, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. But there's the you may not know what it is but it's in the Torah.
Meaning, like, take a super smart academic, right, who doesn't know anything about Judaism, and tell him there are 613 commandments in this book that I'm about to give you.
Mm-hmm.
Find them. He won't come out with 613. I don't think he'll come out with even close to that.
Yeah, because I think that I thought you were saying just the
you know what
point.
I mean?
Yeah, because I think that you get lost in what is a detail of a commandment and what is a separate commandment.
Right, 100%.
So that I totally believe you. I thought you meant that the Torah says, God spoke to Moshe, and then the Oral Torah comes in and says, oh, the fact that God spoke to Moshe means that you have to shake a lulav.
No.
Okay, fine. No. So yeah. Meaning, I think it's just in terms of how you count them, and meaning that Chazal tell us that there are 613 mitzvos, and that's why every list that the Rishonim make of mitzvos, of which there are a few. There's the famous ones are the Rambam and the Ramban. There's also the Sefer mitzvos. There's the Chinuch, right? Like everyone.
Who wrote the Chinuch? Do we know?
I think we know. I don't know who it is offhand, but
there are certain books that we have a tradition that they're in our tradition as valid and worthwhile books that we don't necessarily know who wrote them, right? The one I know offhand is Orchos Tzadikim.
Oh, yeah. Nothing on halacha level, I don't think.
Right, probably nothing on halacha level.
Musar and Kabbalah and stuff like that.
I heard that the Arizal finished Shita Mikubetzes.
Like writing it?
Yeah, when he was 11.
What does that mean?
His Rebbe wrote Shita Mikubetzes.
Okay.
Rav, someone down.
I didn't know that.
Who was it that wrote the Shita?
I don't know.
It was it wasn't the Ramak. It was one of his Rebbeim down in Egypt.
Okay.
And when he was 11,
no way.
He finished writing it.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I never knew that story.
They say by 12 or 13 he knew Shas Baal Peh.
Well, obviously not the guy that we're dealing with.
Who, me?
No, I was saying I was saying in general we're not really dealing with the. Hard for us to imagine that. Yeah, okay, fine. So I thought, that's Chazal tell us there's 613 mitzvahs, but there's a machlokas between these different lists of how many, not how many, but which ones are the 613. So yeah, that I agree with you. No problem with that. Basically, there was a long time period where we have the verses, basically the written Torah is taught over. It's just taught from generation to generation, and the verses, the laws were also given at that time, but basically, you connect verse with law, right? And now we're going to separate ourselves now from the Moshe generation and the generation in the desert. We're going to focus just on how the process got to us, because that's just we'll have to get back to the Moshe generation later when we discuss the challenges to the concept of an oral Torah.
Right.
But for right now, we're just discussing the structure. So you have the verse and you have the law, and basically for years and years that was taught, and then at a certain point, and one of the rules of the oral Torah was that it could not be written down. That's why it's called the Oral Torah. Even though nowadays it is written down, we can discuss why that is.
How that took place.
Right. But at a certain point, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, saw that the Oral Torah was being forgotten, and people were descending into. At that point, it already descended into different arguments. People had forgotten what the exact halacha was, and they had started arguing with each other about what their rabbis had taught them. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi writes down, and that becomes the Mishnah. And then the Mishnah is taken, and that's discussed. And the Mishnahs are extrapolated, and different Mishnayos are compared to one another in different discussions, trying again to figure out which is the best which is the best opinion.
Almost
here.
Like the purest line.
Yeah,
that's how I kind of look.
But there ended up being so many lines, thank God. That,
right, but I'm saying Yehuda Hanassi, I think the way I looked at it is like he sort of he had the shoulders and the brain to compile everything that they had at the time, and come out with the purest direct line of thinking from Moshe to him, and then codified that in written form. Meaning of the actual law, day-to-day law.
Oh, meaning how he codified it. You're saying the sections that he put it into and stuff like that. We should really mention that too. He divided the Mishnah into 6 sections, some dealing with agriculture, holidays, personal law, Indian law. Topics of what?
Criminal law, business
law, all those things. Day-to-day discussions. And then he also talked about holier topics. He talked about different karbonos. He talked about the concept of
sacrifices,
spiritual impurity and purity and stuff like that.
Right.
Marital law, etc., etc.
Divorce law,
etc., etc.
Well, okay, so one point that I think gets overlooked a lot, which to me when I finally read this and I found it out, I was like, it really put me at ease for some reason. Just could be because I'm weird. Okay. But it's not that they never wrote anything down. There are many sources.
It wasn't a formal code.
Right, exactly. They all had notes. These, I'm saying this isn't some crazy like
everyone's a genius
nuts game of like
can remember everything.
Telephone.
Everyone can remember everything.
Yeah, the game of telephone. Like
okay, yeah, for sure.
So it's
like,
totally
hold on, what
legitimate.
did you say again? Oh, okay.
Yeah, they had notes.
There wasn't you couldn't formally write it down and publish it and disseminate it.
Right,
it
wasn't codified and published and disseminated. Right. But mad people had notes, especially teachers had ample notes that they had taken from years and years of sitting through shiurim.
Yeah.
With or without ADD, probably without.
But even in the Gemara, we also find we don't even know what they mean, but sometimes you'll find little abbreviations of different things which were taught were mnemonic devices to help people remember what the sugya was, what the topic was.
Right.
So there always was a concept of trying to keep it as short as possible, not writing down full topics and full tshuvas and stuff like that, just keeping it very basic.
Do we know exactly what, other than the fact that there's a law not to write it down, do we know any reason why that would be useful? Because offhand, it doesn't seem like a very useful commandment.
So why was the Torah? Why was the Oral Torah supposed to remain oral?
Right.
So we'll talk about that. That's the question.
Especially, obviously, assuming that God knew that eventually it was going to have to be written down.
Yeah. What's the advantage to not writing it down? Why was that able to change and we could write it down? But let's finish the structure first. Right. So after the Mishnah, we moved into the time of the Talmud, the Gemara, which there were 2 time periods for it. One was Bavli in Bavel, Babylon. One was in Yerushalmi, Jerusalem.
Which a lot of people don't know because we all mainly learned the Babylonian Talmud, right. Bavli, that the Yerushalmi Talmud was actually written a couple hundred years earlier.
Really? I thought it was later.
No, it was earlier.
Oh, okay.
Rabbi Yochanan wrote it down like a solid 250 years before Ravina and Ravashi started writing in Bavel. Also, a strange thing. Have you ever read Talmud Yerushalmi?
Yeah.
It's
totally different
way
structure.
more Aramaic.
Really?
Yeah. You never noticed that?
I mean, I haven't read that much of it. Mostly
it's significantly
just
more Aramaic than the Bavli one. Which is weird because it's not in Bavli.
Yeah, exactly. You'd think that it would be more in ancient Hebrew. Yeah.
It's not. It's more like the Zohar. It's more written like the Zohar.
Interesting. I don't know enough about it to really talk about it.
It's written in a totally different structure. It's by Perek.
Yeah, it's called halachos. It's not like the full-on rambling discussions that the Bavli has.
Rambling discussions.
No, and sometimes it's very. I mean, it is rambling. You know, there's so many times where you go through a whole page in the Bavli, and it ends up saying, okay, like forget everything we just said. This is actually what matters, because the point of the Bavli is the discussion.
Right.
You know, like that is what makes up the Oral Torah. There's the back and forth learning how we learn the Torah, not just what the halacha was. Yerushalmi was much more, I think, focused on what the final say was, but I don't know enough about it to really comment on it.
Also, I'm pretty sure that the Bavli, which was codified by
Ravina and Ravashi,
and then his colleague Ravashi. Some say also Mar Bar Ravashi helped actually codify it in final form. Mm-hmm. Ravina didn't really put it in print form. I think that Mar Bar Ravashi, his son, put it in final form. But it was a collection of, even those discourses that we have written down, those weren't things that he heard.
No, these were
written. He gathered notes of long discussions, mm-hmm. and then he maybe didn't write. Maybe the Talmud's not word for word what he read from his notes as to what the discussion was, because there's plenty of times in the Gemara where they had a discussion in a different Beis Medrash, and then if you look at the timeline, it was 50 years ago they had this discussion in a different Beis Medrash in a different town. So obviously he didn't know word for word what they were saying.
Right.
It's not like there was someone
sent him a letter or something,
like a dictaphone in the thing in the base, and then he wrote from the dictaphone what they actually were saying.
But this point you're making is very important.
Yeah.
Because I think most people think that when we say Oral Torah, you couldn't write anything down. There was nothing written down.
Yeah, there was mad note-taking going on.
It's impossible. What you're saying basically now is it's impossible to collect 1,000 years worth of information in someone's head.
You
can't
possible.
Do that.
No.
You know, there was some sort of thing. So what's the main point? The main point was that it couldn't be formally put together and disseminated.
Right.
It needed to be worked on. You needed to come to a place. You had to work for it. So what you're saying is a very important point.
Yeah, I mean, it gave, like I said earlier, it gave me a lot of peace of mind in a sense. I don't have to take this giant leap of faith that massive amounts of information. I don't think non-Jews or the non-religious, I don't think they understand just how many details are in the Oral Torah.
No, insane amount.
I don't think they get it. I think they think there are whatever. There's the 10 Commandments, and then there's there's the Shabbos and whatnot. They don't understand how many details and mathematical equations go into building something as simple as a sukkah. You know what I mean?
Right. It's not a simple document.
Not at all.
This is something which puzzles people for their entire lifetimes.
Smart people. Super smart people.
Right, exactly. And the smarter you are, the more puzzling it is.
Correct.
Because the more you really see the brilliance of what was happening.
The depth.
Should we keep going on this point, or do you want to go back to the structure?
No, we can go back to the structure. I just thought that was an important point.
We'll talk about that. We'll keep talking about that when we get into the question that you brought up. So when they codified the Talmud, they codified it on the same system as the Mishnah.
Codified? Why do people say codified?
That's the word.
Yeah, but we say codified.
Yeah, but it's codified.
That's weird.
I don't know what to tell you.
There's certain words like that where you're like, why are you saying it like that?
I don't know what to tell you, man. That's how it is. So it was codified on the same system as the Mishnah, 6 sections with different tractates. The word is in English, but we call them mesechtos. And it's on that system. And basically after that, I think the ban on writing down Torah was pretty much lifted. I don't think you see historically afterwards that anyone was concerned about writing down their works and disseminating it.
Well, I mean, the Rambam in some senses took a lot of heat for codifying it the way he did.
But was that because of just he didn't bring sources? No,
I think that was
he was a radical new way of learning. I don't know if it was because, meaning I think it was more about the Rambam, not because that he printed his Svarim. Am I wrong about that?
No, not at all. But I think a part of the heat he took was you're making things far too simple. Meaning you're blowing up the whole idea of the oral tradition, because any question I have now, in those days anyway,
Right.
you can open up a Rambam.
Meaning the journey from the Gemara to the Shulchan Aruch, which is the simplest version,
Right.
even more simple than the Rambam, had not been completed yet. There needed to be a lot of history before we could get to that stage where we could write something like that down.
Right. I think he took flack for making it so simple. Mm-hmm. And
I just wonder, though, because that wasn't the biggest complaint against the Rambam.
It wasn't.
Was that just piling on, or was that like a legitimate...
I think they were just finding things at that point.
I'm not going to say no. I won't say that. I won't say they were being petty. Chas v'shalom. But I just wonder if all things were equal. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
Were all the complaints against the Rambam equal level, or just we're gonna find in a petty way, but we're going to make sure that we really find everything wrong with this, so we can show people how bad this is.
Right.
And just for history's sake, just so everyone knows, it was a bad time there for a little bit with the Rambam, but history has proven him right, and even the rabbis who were against him admitted that they were wrong.
He came out on top.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, everyone was peaceful even back then. Like, the rabbis who came out against the Rambam eventually admitted that they were mistaken.
Right.
Because Torah was more important than ego.
Not necessarily.
That's our phrase now.
Torah doesn't care about your feelings.
It does, though. That's the problem.
So that became the structure. The Talmud was the last. That was basically that's it. In terms of the Oral Torah, everything that we have nowadays is considered part of the Oral Torah. If you want to say traditional Oral Torah, I would assume that it ends with the Shulchan Aruch and everyone who writes on the Shulchan Aruch. No, 100%. But I'm saying, like, from the vastness of what we have in terms of knowing every mitzvah in its detail was sort of stopped with the Talmud, in the sense that, like, you can extrapolate everything out of the Talmud. All you need now to know all of Torah Shebaal Peh, or every necessary part of Torah Shebaal Peh, all you need is Talmud Bavli.
But even now, we've said that that's not necessarily true, because there are so many things which have been invented, whether it's technology or medically,
but that can
or
all
these
be
things,
learned out from Bavli.
But it's not discussed in Bavli.
It's not discussed, no. But I'm saying that was the totality of the information that was needed. I mean, we're never going to need another Bavli. We're never going to need another massive codification of Torah Shebaal Peh.
Meaning the method of learning out information, the final piece of it is from the Bavli.
Right.
Another piece about the Bavli, which I find interesting, is that it includes all the Agadatas and all the Midrashim, which you don't see in the Mishnah.
Right.
The Bavli felt it was important. Not all of them are found in the Bavli. That's why we have Medrash. Medrash has way more stories than are found in the Talmud.
Yeah.
But the Mishnah doesn't include... It has a few stories here and there, but they're mostly in reference to halachic discussions.
Right.
We don't have Mishnayos or full prakim of Mishnayos that just tell a story about, David HaMelech or, anyone else in history.
Right. What are you saying?
I don't know. It's interesting. It was important, meaning the Mishnah is a strictly halachic discussion with a few things thrown in here and there.
Right.
The Bavli is a full maybe it's just about they're more interested in working out darshaning every single pasuk. And some of the psukim in Nach, besides for the Torah, but also in Nevi'im and Ksuvim, have to deal with things that are, we just want to learn every single pasuk.
It's interesting. Yeah, because obviously, like, Midrashim are packed full of crazy stories. But obviously, a lot of people, I don't know if people necessarily know that around the same time also was written the Sifra Mechilta. Who wrote Medrash Rabbah?
I don't know.
I think Rabbi Akiva, maybe.
I mean, there's so many different Midrashim. I mean, there's so many different books of Medrash, and each one has a different style. Each one teaches different things.
Those are obviously also very important parts of Torah Shebaal Peh.
Yeah. The final part of Torah Shebaal Peh, which we have to mention, as we said, a lot of details of laws are worked out in the Mishnayos and in the Talmud, and we don't necessarily need to make a connection to the generation of Moshe. Even though it's all connected to the generation of Moshe, I mean in terms of Moshe's base medrash. We don't have to make a connection to exactly what Moshe taught. It's sort of just the process. But there are certain laws which we do. We call them halacha l'Moshe miSinai. There are certain halachas which are not talked about in the Torah at all, and they cannot necessarily even be discerned from the psukim. The Gemara lists all of them.
Right. There aren't that many. It's like 18 or something.
That's it? I mean, the major ones are Hilchos Tefillin. That's the ones that everyone knows, halacha l'Moshe miSinai, that basically almost all of the halachos dealing with Tefillin are halacha l'Moshe miSinai.
Right.
That they need to be black, the letters on the boxes. So that's like the big one. Hilchos Tefillin is the big one.
The color of the straps, I think, is
right. The fact that it has to be black.
Black on the outside.
Yeah. I think the one thing we know about Tefillin is from the Torah itself is just where you need to put it.
Not even that.
Well, that's not. Is that halacha l'Moshe miSinai that you put it on your head? No, I don't know
if it's halacha l'Moshe miSinai, but that brings me though to just a side point though, which I think is very. Just
to finish off halacha l'Moshe miSinai.
Yeah.
Those things you need Moshe for. Like there's no other way to learn it because the Talmud doesn't learn it out from the Psukim. They say we know this because Moshe told it to us. So that's like you definitely need Moshe.
Well, without Moshe, I'm saying that's strange. Without Moshe passing on the entire Torah Shebaal Peh,
I was referring to our point earlier. We said that Moshe had the whole Oral Torah, and we were discussing. Okay, so at what point did the Written Torah come in? Did it come in before or after the Oral Torah? And the idea is that regardless of what happened there with Moshe and giving it all over, Moshe obviously gave it over, but we can then go and say, okay, this is the pasuk and this is all the things that we learned out from it.
But we can't do that without Moshe.
We can't do it without Moshe. I hope that was clear. I hope that was clear.
Right.
The fact that Moshe got the Torah is the reason why we can have the Oral Torah. That's for sure. What I mean is that we have a method. We have Moshe's method. Maybe that's the best.
Are you talking about the 13?
No, I'm talking about the. Well, yeah. Well, we can. Yeah, should we talk about that now?
We could. That it's.
Well, let me just finish this point, and then we'll talk. Yeah. We have Moshe's method that he used to teach all of it, and that's given over to us in the Talmud. The Talmud gives over that whole process. But when it comes to halacha l'Moshe miSinai, those halachos, there's no method. Like we don't know how we got that. The only way we know how we got there is because God told Moshe this is what you have to do. So that's what I mean. Just that the halacha l'Moshe miSinai is you need Moshe, and the other ones, quote unquote, you don't need Moshe. Right. Obviously, you need Moshe because he needed to have gotten the Torah for this to be worth anything. But just in terms, we have his process for what's in the Talmud. We have the process as opposed to halacha l'Moshe miSinai.
If we let's put it this way, like if we let's say we lost Torah Shebiksav, we could still be Jewish pretty easily. We would still know what to do fairly easily.
Yes.
If we lost Torah Shebaal Peh, would we be able to rediscover what to actually do?
Would we be able to rediscover? I don't know about what we could or could not rediscover, but if we only had the Written Torah, we would not be able to practice Judaism at all.
No, we'd be far off.
Which is actually one of the things that we'll talk about in terms of how we know the Oral Torah must exist.
Right. Okay. A couple things that popped into my head. The thing that with Tefillin being halacha l'Moshe miSinai, Tefillin being obviously a part of Torah Shebaal Peh, it brought me to one of the points that's brought up a lot if you read any book about validity of Torah Shebaal Peh and validity of these type of things, is the fact that it's written explicitly in Torah Shebiksav that it references Torah Shebaal Peh. It doesn't tell you what it's referencing, but it will say many times, as do such and such as I've told to Moshe Rabbeinu. Well, what did you tell him? You didn't tell us what you told him. Okay, so that's an obvious reference to Torah Shebaal Peh. So it's not like made up. It's not like Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the Torah Shebiksav. It's not like he came down with the Written Torah and he's like, oh well, by the way, God told me this and this also. You ever see that Family Guy where Peter's Moses?
No.
And he's got like a bunch of commandments. And he's like, after the 10th one, he's like, and let me just add one more. Oh no, something like he comes down, he starts eating from the buffet first, and they're like, hey, why do you get to eat first? He's like, it's something like it's the 11th commandment or something.
So the pasuk that you were mentioning about the Torah referencing the Oral Torah.
There are many places where it references the Oral Torah.
So this is the first
Shechita,
example.
it references.
Oh, so this is the first example, and the Gemara in Brachos brings this as an example. This is in Sefer Shmos, Exodus, Parak Chav Daled, pasuk Yud Beis, chapter 24, verse 12. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, Ale Elai Hahara V'yesham. God says to Moshe, come up the mountain to me, and you will be there. V'adna lecha es luchos ha'evan, I will give to you the stone tablets, the stone luchos, v'atorah v'amitzvah, right? The Torah and the commandments, asher kasavti lahorosam, which I wrote to teach them, right? So we see that God is going to give Moshe the tablets along with the Torah and the mitzvos. Now, it's very clear in the written Torah and throughout Jewish tradition that the only thing that was on the luchos were 10 commandments.
Correct.
Right? So the Talmud learns from here that this is a reference to all 613 being given over to Moshe, and actually being, Rashi says that they're even found within the 10 commandments.
Right.
Where he brings that from Rav Sajagon, I think.
Yeah, that's a well-known thing, but you'd have to trip out for a long time.
Well, we don't even need to get into that. The Talmud basically says that you see that God is telling Moshe that even though the only thing I'm giving you written-wise is these 10, I'm giving you everything else with it. So that you see very clearly in the written Torah, like you're saying, a reference to the Oral Torah.
Right, which is obviously super important in terms of just validating that this thing actually existed.
That's definitely one of the proofs from the written Torah itself that there is something else that came along with it.
Right. What really irks me sometimes is like you'll have, and I'm not saying I'm the perfect Jew by any stretch of the imagination, but like let's say you'll have the whole egalitarian situation prayer section by the co-settler, women of the wall. We're getting
political now.
We're getting way political. What? Okay, so they show up, right? They show up to the co-cell wearing a talis and tefillin, holding a Sefer Torah. And they say, we want to pray here too. And then you could say to them, well, the rabbis say that, first of all, you shouldn't be wearing, that's not meant for you to be wearing those two garments, and basically stop making a crazy and no egalitarian, right? You can't pray in a mixed service.
Meaning
right?
You're coming to practice at a place where your whole quote unquote religion doesn't believe in this system.
Right. It's like, why? Okay, so you don't want to listen to the rabbis who are telling you you can't do this, but you're wearing tefillin. Well, how in the world do you know what tefillin is?
Oh, that's awesome.
Why not?
I wasn't even thinking of that.
Yeah. Okay. So it says, okay, put tefillin between your eyes. Where in the world do you know what tefillin is? Only from the rabbis. You don't know what it is. What is a talis? You don't know what it is. Why are there strings hanging? That's a funky looking thing you're wearing there, Mr. or Mrs. or gender
We're
fluid.
not judging.
We're not judging. Whatever you decide that you are today. I consider myself gender fluids, by the way.
Fluids?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I mean, biologically, I'm gender fluids, so made up of gender fluids.
Okay, got it.
We're keeping that in.
Not the craziest thing you've ever said to me about yourself. that I'll keep in. I've had to disprove some certain things to you. That was a fun conversation. Anyway, so exactly what you're saying is the second proof of the Oral Torah.
It's a huge, to me, it's just like, hello, can you put your head on straight for just 1 second? Like, there's so little that we know about the actual commandments from the written Torah. Once you throw out listening to the rabbis, you got to throw out the whole thing. You can't show up wearing your tefillin and then say, oh, we don't, the rabbis are the rabbis. We have our rabbis who say it's fine, and you have your rabbis that say it's not fine, and they're ancients, and, they haven't moved on with the times. And then you show up wearing your tefillin and the tzitziot and doing your thing in a prayer book that was written by the rabbis. There's no prayer book in the written Torah. It's just bogus.
And you're stealing all my thunder, because I thought I'd be able to pull all this from my book, which I'm going to be referencing every week.
Reality
check, a handbook of Hashkafa. Find it at hashkafahandbook.com or contact us.
And no, we are not sponsored by the proceeds of the book.
So we are not. So we need Elon Musk. We still need you. But this is the second proof that you could bring to the validity of the Oral Torah, which is that if you just read the Written Torah, it doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't make any sense.
You can't tell me to put tefillin on my hand and on my head. What's tefillin?
Right.
I don't know what tefillin is. Right. And the most ironic thing, just getting into tefillin specifically, is that we said that tefillin is totally reliant on Moshe.
Yeah, totally.
The rabbis couldn't even figure it out in the Talmud, or not that they couldn't, but they didn't have the method for tefillin. They had to get that all from Moshe.
Right.
Another great example. Shrita. That is a great
slaughtering
example.
an animal in a way.
It says all the time to shecht animals. What's shechting? It doesn't say to kill the animals. It doesn't say la rogue in the Torah. It says leshchot. To slaughter. What does that mean?
How? Using what? In what method?
What is slaughter?
What makes it good?
Just kill the animal.
Right.
What's slaughter the animal? Because people think, no, killing and slaughtering is different. No, that's English. In English, it's different. When I tell you to slaughter something, I don't know what that means. It's just an English word.
I found out today that Charles Dickens coined the term manslaughter.
Really? In which book?
It was in a Mishpacha kids magazine on the table.
I meant in which book did Dickens...
I don't read that
Why are they discussing manslaughter in the Mishpacha Kids magazine? That's terrible.
The world these days.
What do the kids need to know about manslaughter? Why do they? Got enough to know about.
Are you trying to keep the kids out of the world of information?
Just for a little bit. I prefer they learn about giraffes and why they're yellow.
Do we know why they're yellow?
Just tell me something about that. I didn't know Charles Dickens taught me about killing somebody else.
It's one of the words that he coined was manslaughter.
I can just see, little Schmerl coming to his father at the Shabbos table. Hey, Dad, what's manslaughter mean? But, what's shrita? What does it mean? We talked about this earlier in the podcast. What does it mean when you say lo sasa kol malacha on Shabbos? Don't do any work. What's work?
Right.
The rabbis need to tell us what work is. An example that I love.
There's plenty of things that you could do that would technically constitute work.
Which you're allowed to do on Shabbos. Right. And there are plenty of things which you would not consider work, like flipping a light switch, which you're not allowed to do on Shabbos.
Correct.
So there's a definite, we have no idea what work means. And it's definitely not our definition.
I definitely don't know what work means because,
he's in the army.
Work.
So, he's in the army, folks. The Israeli army.
Working hard in the Israeli army.
Another great example, because I love
keeping all y'all safe.
Thank God. Thank you for your service.
Yes.
So an example that I love is Lulav and Esrog. All it says in the Torah is that you take Pri-Eitz Hadar. You take the beautiful fruit of a tree. I love pears.
I love pears, man.
Strawberries are beautiful.
I only really like the pears when they're a little bit squishy.
Well, that's what you need, yeah. Squishy ones.
You know that they make a thing now, a hybrid of an apple and a pear?
What's it called?
I don't know, but it's super tasty.
Pearl. Maybe it's called a pearl. I'd go for that. But you have no idea what it means. And imagine there's no Oral Torah. God's dropping an instruction manual on our doorstep, and he doesn't tell us anything to do with it. So that's ridiculous. That's totally ridiculous. So whether you believe that God gave us the manual, whether you believe Moshe wrote the manual himself, either way, the manual is not good enough.
It's not very useful.
You need something else with it. So, and
especially when it comes to like criminal law, it's not at all how it's. For instance, like I listen to a lot of secular people like online, right, talk and stuff. One of the common claims you'll hear is like. It's a good thing. Like, for instance, they'll say, like, okay, so the Christians have evolved their religion based on Iniquus. What was that guy's name? Iniquus or whatever, who basically diluted their old beliefs, and then the Jews have also evolved from what they used to do and their beliefs, and now have a much more peaceful religion and whatnot. And the Muslims are the ones left still running around chopping people's heads off because it's written in the book, right? Yeah. So, and one of the points when I always think about that is like, okay, well, first of all, let's say according to our according to the Oral Torah, according to the halachos that we have stemming back from thousands and thousands of years, even then we were not, by any stretch of the imagination, a barbaric people. If you saw a gay, like, one of the things that they like to harp on, this, like, secular people nowadays, like, well, so if we were to go back to the original book of the Jews would be, throwing gay people off roofs or stoning them.
Right.
That's not remotely true. It requires, if you read the tractate, the Oral Torah, the tractate of Sanhedrin, it's extraordinarily difficult to kill somebody according to the
very much
Jewish law.
And to the fact there's a famous Mishnah which says that if you killed one person every 7 years...
7D.
Well, that's the second opinion.
Oh.
But we end up saying that opinion is ridiculous because then you would never kill anybody and no one would be afraid to do anything.
Oh, really?
But that's what the Gemara says about that opinion.
Oh, interesting.
But the standard opinion is Rabbi Akiva, who says 7 years. If you kill someone once every 7 years, then you're called a Beis Din that kills people.
Right.
7 years, people.
Meaning, essentially, you're not doing your job properly.
I think California kills people more often than that.
No, but how many people go to death row every year in the U.S.?
Right, whether or not they get killed or not. But they're put up
essentially,
on death row.
they're dead. They're on death row.
Eventually, yeah.
Right. I don't want to talk about that now.
There's no death row in Judaism. You're either going to be killed and you get killed right away.
And not only that, you get drugged before they kill you. You know this. It's Gemara and Sanhedrin. In the tractate Sanhedrin, the women of Jerusalem had a special fund for some sort of potion that they would make. Potion. I don't mean like magical potion. Some sort of concoction, an elixir that they would make to give to anybody who may come to a death penalty, and the dude would drink it beforehand and be tripping nuts.
You're really into this.
Yeah. How dope is that? It's like, first of all, so you have to die, and you've gone through a super long, not long like drawn out, but a super exacting and rigorous process to finally say, okay, we have all the evidence, we're actually going to kill you. Even then, the Jews were moral enough to be like, okay, well, we don't want you to feel any pain. So drink this trippy thing. You'll be tripping nuts on... It was probably...
You don't sit in a cell.
Poppy related.
You had to kill them right away.
Right, you couldn't let them sit around.
You couldn't wait.
Not only that, but the dude, on the way to go get killed, wherever he was going to die, the convict would have at all times with him a rider on a horse. And if the guy could come up with any reason why he's innocent, the rider would run back to the court and be like, "Oh, hey, stop! We got a claim. Like, they took serious precautions not to kill people unnecessarily. And plus, if you just look through the basic laws of how to cross-examine witnesses,
very difficult.
So to say that to go back to the book, I'm doing air quotes now, you can't see, that we'd be throwing people off roofs and stoning people for not keeping the Shabbos is highly inaccurate.
But there's also the risk of that, and this comes in every society, that when you take away the fear of ultimate punishment, be that death or whatever the ultimate punishment is, it could lead to a breakdown in society, because people will take advantage of the system. So,
yes and no. Another interesting point about Jews and their general morality, based on these things, is that we discontinued our ability to dish out capital punishment nearly 2,500 years ago.
As soon as we lost total control of our own selves, meaning as soon as the Jews were exiled,
the judges themselves said, we no longer have the capacity to judge honestly and fairly on things like this, on things like capital punishment. That was 2,500 years ago.
Yeah.
Talk about morality. And things have obviously lasted. You and I are sitting here today. It's not like Jews went around now killing each other.
Right.
They may have stolen a lot of people's money in the meantime.
I don't think so. Fairly. Legally
stolen their money.
I mean, like, if you're just because you're better at the game doesn't mean you're stealing it.
Right. Tax evasion is not necessarily illegal.
No, that's illegal. I'm talking about just being good at making money. Jews are just good at making money. But the point that I wanted to say is that Beis Din, and I don't know the full details of this, and I don't want to get into this because it's a separate thing. But Beis Din did have authority. The Jewish courts did have authority to do different things, even with somebody who wasn't necessarily guilty of capital punishment. They had their ways of dealing with renegades in society.
Oh, 100%.
It's not like it happened. It's not like
they had jails.
They had jails, but it wasn't like you sat in jail for 20 years until you corrected your crimes. Like, they had a way of making sure that people listened to what they did.
Do we know what those ways are? That sounds really scary.
I mean, the common way was beatings.
It was floggings.
Right.
But even then, there would be a physician on hand.
Right. It
so
was
to
all.
Make sure
it was
didn't
very.
Go too far.
Yeah. It was definitely. This stuff didn't really happen. Like, it's obvious that it didn't really happen. Because again, like once in 7 years they killed somebody. Not that they sentenced someone to die.
And it doesn't mean that they would be like, oh, we got to hit our quota. But it's, guys, we're at 6 1/4 years. We got to hit our quota. We got to
find someone to kill.
We got to kill somebody.
No, it means that there were people that were brought up on these charges every once in a while.
Right.
And it was just extremely hard to get a guilty conviction. Because we try very hard not to kill somebody.
Another interesting thing that I find about Jewish criminal law is that, first of all, 23 judges it took to kill somebody, not some dude in a black dress.
Right. Or 12 of your peers.
Or 12 of your peers. Not only did it take 23 people, but if all 23 came down with a conviction of kill, dude's innocent. Did you know that?
Yeah.
How trippy is that?
You
need to have at least one dissenting opinion.
Yeah. And even with a dissenting opinion, you had to have a 2-person... You couldn't have a 1-person majority. In order to... Meaning it couldn't be 13... It couldn't be 11... It couldn't be... What would it be? 12-11. It could not be 12-11 that he would be killed. It had to be at least 13-10.
Right.
So we're talking about between 1... We're talking about between 1 and 10 dissenting votes.
Right. Yeah, so these things are... It's if we went back to having the Sanhedrin today, there wouldn't be mass killing. Jews would not be rolling around just basically stoning people to death.
Very few deaths.
Very few deaths. Which I think is an important... I mean, for me anyway, because I guess of the things that I listen to in the secular world, it's an important point to make.
Right. It was a very moral society, even if it was an ancient culture.
Extremely moral. And
this is all relevant because criminal law is a big part of the Oral Torah.
A big part.
This is all relevant.
And also because it's currently living, it's still alive today, the criminal law. Yeah. Meaning some people think that we moved on, that we moved on from Jews moved on from capital punishment for reasons other than what they really are. Meaning people think that we've moved on from capital punishment of stoning, I keep going back to this because people nowadays really love this, but like of killing gay people, we moved on because we got more moral. No, we didn't stop killing people because we got more moral. We stopped killing people because we were originally always very moral. Meaning they said to themselves, we no longer have the stature and the self-awareness to judge fairly on these cases anymore. So across the board, we're cutting this out of our capability.
Right. So those are 2 basic proofs as to why we know the Oral Torah is necessary. Because without it, you couldn't understand the Written Torah.
There is one other thing though about a proof which I've heard, which is just interesting, that Rabbi Lawrence Kellerman talks about. Whereas if you actually run the telephone game, but you add in significant incentives and smart people, it's pretty darn accurate.
Just to speak out what exactly that means, the classic game of telephone we all did as kids in camp, is that you have a line of people, one person whispers something into the person next to him's ear, and you keep whispering it down the line, and the challenge is that it's the exact same thing that goes into the first person as what comes out of the last person.
Right.
And most of the time you end up saying something different.
Ridiculous.
Just because saying something to somebody else, eventually, over time, things get messed up.
Right. Not only that, there's always nudniks that throw it off. Including myself.
That was me.
That was me too.
Because I could never hear what the person was saying, so I just said whatever I wanted.
So you just completely made it up?
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. That was you.
Yeah, that was me. I mean, we're different ages.
Yeah, so if Kellerman, he ran a study. I wouldn't call it an official study, but I'm saying he ran an experiment himself where he just added in smart, like, kids from a particular, for a certain reason, there were kids there who were high in academics in college already. They were doing a particular program. He took them and added in a bonus of like $5 for each person in the winning team or whatever it was.
Uh-huh.
And and they had like a couple minutes to study. And basically all he did was add incentive and a little bit more of like, directed intelligence.
So we have smart people.
And it was very...
What's our incentive?
I mean, well, the incentive is literally is eternity. The incentive is
the Word of God.
The Word of God. There's no
it's a strong incentive.
There's no bigger incentive than that. In this world and the next world, there's no bigger incentive than that. Plus, we've had, these kids had 30 minutes to figure out to pass on the complicated message, right? I mean, the smartest of our generations have 70, 80, 90, 100 years to master the message and pass it on.
Right.
There's a lot more time. There's significant incentive, and they're very, very smart. So even if you want to say, obviously, they took notes, which is an important point, I think, even still, you might be able to get pretty darn far through the generations.
You can get very far.
Just by playing quote-unquote telephone.
Okay, everyone, that's it for this week. Hope you enjoyed that. Please stay tuned for next week where we put out part 2 of this discussion on the validity of the Oral Torah. In the meantime, you could reach us at backofthebase@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter at Kumsitzguy, and both Yehuda and I are on Facebook, Yehuda Rabinowitz and Yosef Siegel. Please let us know what you thought of this episode. Please contact us with ideas for other episodes, any questions that you might want us to talk about, or just answer privately. We'd love to hear from you, and we look forward to it. So thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time in the Back of the Base.